You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 395 of the podcast. And in this one, I interview Hannah, who has kindly agreed to share her OCD story with us. And in particular, we talk about harm worries around her children, hit and run themed OCD, finding a therapist who specializes in OCD, her core fears, doing exposure and response prevention therapy, doing ERP while raising her kids, medication, support groups, OCD and her faith, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to Hannah for coming on and sharing her story. I do appreciate it. And of course, thank you to you guys for listening. As always, it means a lot. And without further ado, here is Hannah. Welcome to the podcast, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me, Stuart.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. As you know, I love to hear people's OCD stories. So as little as much detail, it'd be good to hear yours now.
Absolutely. And first, I just want to say thank you so much for what you do. This podcast was a great source of hope for me in really the darkest experience of my life. When I was diagnosed with OCD, I did not know anyone in my life who had OCD. So being able to listen to this podcast and hear these stories of hope was so powerful for me. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
So I would say looking back from a really young age, I had a lot of anxiety and perfectionism, but I did really well in school and sports. I had great friends, and it really wasn't impacting my life in a significant way. My fears looking back were pretty normal fears. I would get so anxious before I would have to do like a presentation or a speech in front of my class. And my perfectionism was around schoolwork and grades. So I did very well in school. I became a family nurse practitioner. I have had significant responsibilities in my career, which I have loved. And I especially always loved connecting with patients regarding their mental health because I had a personal understanding of what anxiety is and what it feels like. So I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder about 9 years ago. I started taking just a low dose of an SSRI. That helped a lot. I went to therapy as needed, which was also really helpful. So my generalized anxiety disorder was really well managed for almost a decade, including during the pregnancy and postpartum period with my first two kids. So I really wasn't too worried when I was going to have my third baby. I had already gone through pregnancy and delivery and postpartum period twice before, and I thought I had everything in place. I had my medication for anxiety. I had my therapist. I had a supportive husband and family. I had a babysitter who was coming a few times a week to help me with my 2 and 4-year-old. So I expected the first few months to be very stressful, but then I noticed that my anxiety and my fears were increasing. So by the time my third baby was about 6 to 9 months old, I knew that something was really wrong. I remember feeling like I was losing my mind, and I remember telling my husband that my mind was scaring me. So within really a matter of a few weeks, I felt that my anxiety went from pretty normal fears that I was used to really extreme thoughts, which I now know were intrusive thoughts and OCD. But at the time, even being a medical professional, being a nurse practitioner, I did not know what was happening to me. So my thoughts were pretty much all around harm. So my initial thoughts were accidentally harming my children. So one of the first thoughts that I think I really noticed was getting out of hand was the concern that I would leave something in my baby's crib, that she would choke or that she would get strangled, and that I would be responsible for that and possibly found guilty of harming her or neglecting to protect her, and that she would die. So I would check the crib over and over again, even though I was seeing that there wasn't anything in the crib. As soon as I would close her door and walk away, I would think I probably need to check again. I still feel like I may have missed something. And then I would finally go to bed. I would sleep holding the baby monitor so that I could wake up a lot during the night to look at it and make sure. And then a lot of times that ended up needing to go look at her again, just to make sure she was breathing. I was also really terrified that I would accidentally leave my children in their car seats on a hot day in the car. So I would check the car seats over and over to make sure I had not left them in the car. I would even take pictures of the car seats so that I could reassure myself later, like if I was going to work or something, I could reassure myself that they were not in the car. So then more and more thoughts of harm flowed in and completely overwhelmed me. Then my breaking point when OCD I felt like it took over my life, was when my daughter, my third, was about 9 months old, and I had a terrifying thought that I hit and killed someone while I was driving. But I did not know that I did, and that the police were looking for me and that I would be arrested. So every knock on the door was really scary and felt like my worst nightmare is going to happen. I'm going to be arrested in front of my 3 little kids. I'm going to be taken away from them. So really, when I would hear a knock on the door, my heart would start racing and I would feel sick. And that went on for probably a good few weeks after that first incident. And I would say, looking back, it wasn't actually that I thought I hit someone. It was the not 100% certainty that I didn't. So that's when I started trying to really figure out what was happening to me. I really felt like I was going crazy. On one hand, like I said, I didn't think I hit someone. I thought I saw the person ride on their bike across the street, but I just wasn't 100% sure. And so I Googled the intersection and thought of maybe I could just call the police and just tell them that someone kind of cut me off on their bike at this intersection and just get reassurance. I did not do that. But it was so terrifying. I felt that I could not trust myself. I could not trust what my mind was telling me, and I didn't know what to do. And I had so much responsibility in my life, taking care of these 3 little kids, a newborn, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And I did not know if I would be able to ever think clearly or be free from this crippling anxiety that had taken over my life fairly rapidly. So after doing some research online, I diagnosed myself with OCD. I was really, really fortunate because I already had a psychiatrist who I trusted, and I was able to get an appointment with him within less than 2 weeks. And he was very supportive and answered so many of my questions about OCD, about medications, hormones, everything. Thankfully, he had treated many people with OCD, and He actually told me that the hit and run OCD thought was a pretty common thought. So I did not know that. I really felt like I was the only one struggling with this. I was also really fortunate to already have a therapist who I had seen for many years. She was so kind and compassionate. So I told her that I had spoken with my psychiatrist and had been diagnosed with OCD, and wanted to start working on that in therapy. So she had been tremendously helpful for me for many years in navigating like life stress, work stress, relationships, parenting. But she wasn't trained in OCD, and she definitely did not claim to be trained in OCD. She did tell me about Pure O. As I told her, most of my battle was just in my mind. It was not things that people would be able to see, such as kind of my thought of what OCD was washing hands. And I know that can be how it manifests, but there's so many other ways that it can too. So she recommended that I could try to pull a rubber band on my wrist whenever I had an OCD thought. And she also said there is something called exposure and response prevention, but that would increase my anxiety. And I said, well, I definitely can't do that. I felt like I was living on almost panic levels all the time. So I felt that I can't possibly increase my anxiety. So I tried pulling the rubber band for my thoughts twice. And then I just broke down crying, thinking, if this is the treatment, I am never going to get better. I had not shared much with her in terms of my actual OCD thoughts, because I was scared and I was ashamed. So she really didn't know the severity of what was going on. I was reading through my journal from this time when OCD was the most difficult. I was reading through this last night, actually, and I saw just kind of a reminder, even to myself, of how dark it was. I wrote, this was kind of newly diagnosed with OCD. I'm not sure what my life will look like moving forward, but I have to do my best to find a way to function in the best possible way for my kids. I have not slept more than 1 hour in the past 3 days. So that was how intense the anxiety was, that I couldn't sleep. I felt like I could barely function. Thankfully, I have an incredible sister who is a therapist, and she owns her own private practice. She specializes in trauma and EMDR. And she had clients in the past who had OCD. So I am so thankful for my sister and for feeling really safe to tell her what was going on, and that she encouraged me to do the best thing I could have done, which was to find an OCD therapist and someone who specialized in OCD. So my sister told me about an OCD practice in the Chicago area. It is the OCD and Anxiety Center in Oak Brook, Illinois. I was really fortunate again that they had an opening pretty quickly. So I was able to see an OCD therapist and start ERP within about a month of being diagnosed with OCD, which now I know is really incredible and is not the norm. I just feel really fortunate that I was able to access that care and so quickly. I remember telling my original therapist that I thought I was just going to see the OCD specialist for a few sessions and then I would be back. But recovery took much longer than I anticipated, and it was much harder than I thought it would be. Something that I wanted to share that was really hopeful to me when kind of on the beginning of my OCD journey, I was just reading every book that I could find about OCD. So I read Freedom from Obsessive Compulsive Disorder by Dr. Jonathan Grayson. And one of the most helpful things he wrote was, the quote is, "The good news is that while OCD can be a devastating and debilitating psychological disorder, surprisingly, it is one of the most treatable." So when I read that, I just felt so much hope. So going into meet with my OCD therapist, I thought I would probably tell the OCD therapist my list of OCD thoughts, and she would tell me that's OCD, and then I would just be able to move on from that. So I learned pretty quickly that exposure and response prevention is really hard work. I made a list of all of my thoughts and what I was doing. So the obsessions were mostly related to harm and responsibility. And then also the compulsions were mostly mental, like rumination, avoiding, but also checking and asking for reassurance. So I had never had a therapy that made me feel worse in the moment. That was so hard. And that made me dive so deep into my fears, including my core fear, which was being separated from my children and not being the mom they needed. So I am so thankful for a therapist who truly understood OCD and who made me look into my core fears really early on. Who explained that this was about uncertainty. It was not about driving. It was not about my baby's safety. It was about uncertainty. And a therapist who also did not reassure me in the way I wanted her to. I would have loved to have heard her say, "Oh, you're such a great person. You wouldn't run over and hit someone and then drive off." But I never got that. And now I'm really thankful that I didn't. But throughout the entire process of a lot of hard work with ERP, my therapist was so kind and so compassionate. And she cheered me on when I did ERP. That was a huge deal to me, but I didn't feel like I could tell anyone. I'm so excited. I drove 3 blocks and I didn't write down that I didn't think I hit anyone. But to me, that was a big deal. And she was definitely my encourager all throughout. So there were months that I felt that I could only maintain my progress and not work hard towards my next step. Because the stress of parenting 3 little kids, they got sick a lot. It's exhausting to raise 3 little kids. And then trying to fit ERP into your life and do ERP while you are raising kids was really, really hard. So I kind of felt like, I always felt like I need to spend like an hour driving every day, or I need to set aside this time in the week where I have like 2 hours to drive. But I kept trying to set that aside, and then I would fail to do that and I would get frustrated. So my therapist was so patient. She really helped me think out of the box in terms of my driving exposures. And so initially I started with doing some imaginal exposures and fear scripts. That was a pretty short amount of time. And then I went into just kind of feeling like what I could fit into my life, which I'm thankful that as a mom, I had to drive my kids many places every day. I didn't have the option of not driving them. So that was really good for me. And so initially I would if we had to drive somewhere, I would just drive different ways home or different ways to go there to kind of mix it up a little bit. And then I started incorporating, because I didn't feel like I could set aside this like 1 hour per day, but we were out so many places that then I could incorporate driving a little bit more each time. And my therapist recommended, why don't you do something enjoyable, drive somewhere enjoyable. So I love coffee, and my kids love snacks and treats and McDonald's. So we went to probably all of the McDonald's, Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, like you name it, in all of the
Mm.
surrounding towns. And they happened to love it. And then I also needed times. Thankfully, I had a babysitter that would come at least once a week. So I could do some of those driving exposures by myself because I really needed also to really not have anyone in the car as any kind of reassurance, because I felt like if someone was in the car, they might react if I hit someone. So I really needed to be doing it by myself too. So with at the hardest time with my hit and run fear, I was looking in the rear view mirror all of the time to make sure I had not hit anyone. I was circling around to make sure I hadn't hit anyone. And then I would, every time I arrived somewhere, I would write in my phone every street I had driven. And if I drove past someone who was on a bike or who was walking, and if I drove by just fine and didn't hit them. And then at the end of the day, when my kids were in bed, I would have to review all of those notes that were on my phone. So it was exhausting. So that was just a little bit over a year ago that I started ERP. And now after doing ERP, I am thankfully driving just fine. I don't feel any need to write anything down. And I am so thankful for that freedom. I don't take it for granted. And if I have thoughts that I may have hit someone, which I still do, I just say, I believe that's likely OCD, and I move on driving and with what I want to do for the day. So I accept the small risk that I may have hit someone, realizing it's pretty unlikely that I would hit someone and not know, but I'll accept that small risk for the quality of life that is important to me, which is living life and not allowing my OCD to make decisions for me or to take me away from anything I want to do. So therapy was so hard. ERP was so hard, but living with the level of OCD and anxiety I had was almost unbearable. I also decided a few months after being diagnosed, I decided, with talking with my psychiatrist, I decided I wanted to switch SSRIs and try a different medication. I was really, looking back, I was really looking for the cure for OCD, for my intrusive thoughts. I wanted a medication to just take the thoughts away and allow me to go back to my normal self. So I discussed it a lot with my psychiatrist. He definitely told me that it can be pretty challenging, but it was much more difficult than I thought it would be. And during the time I was going off of one medication and starting one, so it lasted a few months. And during that time, I felt absolutely bombarded by very intense, intrusive thoughts all the time. The most significant thoughts that came up during that period of changing medications was the thought that I may have hurt or killed someone or accidentally touched someone inappropriately, but I had no memory of it. And I didn't know if maybe it was something I did in the past, like years and years ago, or if it was something that I did that day, but I had no memory of it. So basically everywhere was scary. So I would walk down the sidewalk and then need to look back at people and make sure I hadn't hurt or killed them. And no matter how many times I looked back and actually saw the person still walking, it was never enough. I still needed to review my memory in the evening after the long and exhausting days of raising 3 little kids. I would need to review if I had killed someone and would forever be taken away from my kids, which was my core fear. Um, it was just excruciating pain. It was so exhausting. And I felt that I could never be present with my children in the moment because I had these terrible thoughts saying, if you don't make sure, you'll be taken away from your children, or you're probably a terrible person and you don't know it. Um, I remember, like I said, just feeling scared all the time because there was no safe space. My mind and my thoughts were what was scaring me, and there was no way to escape them. And I could not get away from my own mind and my own thoughts. And then through all of this pain, a lot of people, most people around me did not know that anything was going on. They did not know that I was suffering because I didn't look any different. I was still doing everything I needed to do, getting my kids to school on time. Thankfully, my close friends and family were extremely supportive, and my husband was the most kind, supportive spouse I could have asked for. He never made me feel like a burden, even when I felt like I really was. And he made sure I had access to the best treatment and support available. But even though I had such an incredible support system and therapist and psychiatrist, I still felt alone in OCD because none of them had OCD. And because I didn't know anyone in my life who had OCD. Other difficult things that I had experienced in my life, I knew at least a couple people who had experienced the same thing that I could talk to. So I searched for a support group for OCD, just looked online, and I found the most supportive group of other moms experiencing perinatal OCD, so OCD in pregnancy or the postpartum period. The group was with Postpartum Support International, and it was online every week. It was free. And it was just profoundly helpful to connect with others who were going through the same thing and having similar thoughts. And then another level was that they were going through all of this while being pregnant or having babies and having that added stress. So it became an absolute must for me to attend weekly. I learned so much and I felt so empowered to fight for my recovery as I saw other moms doing. So I will forever be grateful that I found that support group. I just love Postpartum Support International. They have so many amazing free resources. I also was matched up with a peer mentor. So they have a peer mentor program, again, that's free. They match up moms who have gone through like postpartum depression or anxiety, OCD, match up a mom who has gone through that previously and is in a good place with that, with moms who maybe are newly diagnosed. So I had a peer mentor. So she had recovered from postpartum anxiety and OCD symptoms. And we would talk on the phone once a week and then text throughout the week. And she would always know when I was kind of working on my biggest exposures and text me and just say she was thinking about me that day. So that really meant a lot. So now I volunteer with Postpartum Support International in a couple different capacities, helping lead a support group and then as a peer mentor as well. And it has just become one of the greatest honors of my life to be able to support other moms who have OCD, because I really know the deep pain and the difficulty in finding help and support. And I now know that women during pregnancy and the postpartum period have a higher prevalence of OCD. Yet postpartum OCD is still really misunderstood. It's something that I didn't even know. It was not on my radar. postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety were things that I had thought about, but I really didn't know anything about postpartum OCD. So, and I was just looking over resources that I have from Postpartum Support International too, and it says perinatal women have a 1.5 to 2 times greater risk of OCD onset than the general population. So I did not know that, and I think that's helpful for moms to be aware of. So Postpartum Support International, like I said, so many amazing resources. The website is postpartum.net. They have support groups, like I said, the peer mentor program. They have a lot more too. They have like postpartum planning classes. So you can kind of like a way to just kind of think about all of this and plan for this. Another resource that would have been helpful if I knew about it would have been, they have a perinatal mental health discussion tool. That is something that you can just find it online on their website, and then you check off. So it has it says what like perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, depression, anxiety, OCD. It lists some of the common symptoms, and then you can just check off if you are having any of those and then take that to your doctor. So that would have been so helpful for me because I didn't know that these obsessions and compulsions, I didn't know. Well, I would say I really felt like I was the only one experiencing these because the only thing I was given postpartum was like the depression scale, and I didn't feel depressed. So I really felt like my symptoms must be so rare that they don't even include this here. So, so just the things that have been so helpful for me on my OCD journey, finding my therapist who understood OCD, medication, a psychiatrist, having so much support, which I've been fortunate to have. Also, really educating myself about OCD was very powerful. So I learned so much from listening to this podcast. So helpful. Also, for moms, specifically like in pregnancy or postpartum, I really liked the book Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts by Karen Kleiman, because it just kind of normalizes those fears that a lot of moms have. Intrusive thoughts, even if that is not to the level of OCD. So I didn't know that. I loved, like I said, Freedom from OCD by Dr. Jonathan Grayson. Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts was a really helpful book. And then just incorporating mindfulness was very helpful for me. I loved the book Everyday Mindfulness for OCD. That was really helpful, really encouraging, gave me some like very practical tools. And then I loved the book Brain Lock because it really helped me to understand this idea of building new pathways in my brain. And that to me was an exciting idea. So I was able to start focusing on that idea of feeling the pain of ERP as building these new neural pathways and focusing on cheering myself on with that and feeling the pain as you're changing your brain, and focusing on that instead of focusing on, I just have to not do this. I just have to resist these compulsions. So that was a really helpful thought for me. Also, I am a big fan of Jenna Overbaugh. She is excellent. She has really just listening to her, and I'm a big fan. I take a lot of her classes, which are so wonderful because it's so accessible and affordable. She's been really open with her own postpartum OCD journey and just very vulnerable. And I felt very empowered by hearing an OCD expert talking about their own experience and even how it continues to be something they're working on. And she's just been very encouraging to me through everything that she offers. Also, I attended online the International OCD Foundation's Faith and OCD conference. My Christian faith is really important to me. So being able to connect with others with OCD who share the same faith and then also across different faiths was really beautiful. And I do think that part of my shame and guilt around my thoughts, being mostly harm thoughts, was that I am a Christian. I'm a mom, I'm a nurse practitioner, and I felt that I shouldn't be having these thoughts. I think as a Christian, I had heard so much about making sure that you have pure thoughts. But what do you do with that when you are not in control of your thoughts and they are definitely not good and you know that? So now I've come to my own personal belief that God can see the difference between what a mental illness is and who I want to be, and who I'm striving to be. So also, the book Brain Lock was really helpful for me. As he said, pretty much the same thing. God can certainly tell the difference between what is in your heart and is real and what is just a false message coming from your brain. And then he goes on to say, like all battles worth winning, in the end, it's a test of faith. So I also had a new experience for me. During the time I was going through ERP was having a spiritual director. I didn't really know what a spiritual director was. I didn't know much about it. But it was a really incredible experience for me, just to really have like a safe place to talk about my spiritual thoughts, doubts, fears, and to just feel a very safe space for that. So that was really, really important to me. And through it all, I feel also really fortunate that my faith in God really was so helpful for me. And I know that is not the case for everyone with OCD. And so I'm very sensitive to that. But for me, it was the idea that even if my biggest fears happen, so even if I end up in prison or end up in the psychiatric hospital, or end up separated from my children in some way, I had faith that God would be with me. And I realized that what I've had all my life is faith. It's not certainty, and that's okay that it's not certainty, it's faith. And it's so important to me, and really helped me through my journey. So also I discovered yoga, loved yoga, incorporated a lot of the mindfulness that I was learning through OCD, and just was a great fit. Also, another thing that was really significant to me was just this idea of the difference between believing something and knowing something has been really profound for me in my recovery. I realized that there are many things that I believe and have faith and trust in, and that's enough. I don't need to know for sure in order to live my life and press on toward my values. And I think another really significant point in my OCD journey, which just felt like when I accepted this, I was just really able to move on past the tight grip of OCD, was just this idea that I realized it was okay if I never went back to my normal before having my third baby and having OCD and intrusive thoughts. I had been wanting so badly to not have intrusive thoughts, but I realized it was okay if that never happened, because I knew what the thoughts were. And so they could come and I could continue on with my day and with my life. And it was my choice how to react to them. So I also realized that my new normal was really great too. In so many ways, it was, or I am, after this journey, deeper. I have gone through so much. I have learned so much. I now have a great appreciation for being able to do small things like being able to drive my kids to McDonald's, being able to be present with them when I am with them. Because there were times that I felt that that was too much for me. I also had to realize that my greatest fear, which was being separated from my children, was in reality what OCD was doing. OCD was taking me away from them. And I fought really hard to not allow that to continue. So I don't want to think about what my journey would have looked like if I had not found the incredible support I found. And I'm forever grateful for that. So I just want to say, for anyone that has OCD and might be listening, it can be a really, really long road, a lot of hard work, but you are worth it and you can do it. The OCD community is filled with some of the most amazing people I have ever met. They are some of the kindest people, most compassionate, caring people. And I really believe that's because they understand like a deep pain and suffering, or if they are someone, a therapist or a family member or a spouse supporting someone with OCD, they understand it from that perspective. It's hard for them too. And I've just seen so many just amazing people in the OCD community. So I'm really proud to be a part of the OCD community and to share my story. And it's just such a great joy and honor for me now to help others on their OCD journey. So thank you so, so much for allowing me to share my story.
And my pleasure. Thank you for sharing it. And for sharing, everything that's helped you and those resources. And I will link to all of that in the show notes.
Okay, great.
So people can find it. So look, I really like the idea of what your therapist did with driving was obviously an issue. So as an exposure, not just go drive, it was go drive to the places you love or the places your kids enjoy. So, we'd call that like a values-based exposure, which just makes exposure therapy that much more tolerable when you're also doing something you enjoy. Was there, around the hit and run or the other OCD themes, were there any other sort of values-based exposures you did or exposures that linked up with something that you enjoy or value? Or
I would say the majority. So thankfully and I should have said this too, because this is significant. The thoughts that came in, so really almost all of my ERP was driving. I was able to get through the other things pretty quickly with doing ERP. And the other thoughts that came up when I had my medication change, I'm so thankful that I already knew how to do ERP. So I just quickly realized what it was, and I was able to do ERP on my own because I was, I think, only seeing my therapist maybe every other week at that time. So I was able to incorporate what I had already learned. And then I just told her about it, and I didn't really need to do much more. I already kind of knew what I was supposed to be doing. I just needed support and kind of felt like I needed accountability to just be able to say those thoughts. And so almost all of my ERP was around driving. So so I would say I just did other things. I love listening to music. So I would find music that I enjoyed while I was driving. And It was really scary at first because I felt like I was almost at a panic level. And so
Hmm.
I didn't want to be at a panic level when you're driving, of course, like that's
Yeah.
scary. So that's why I started it was pretty slow to start with. But I felt huge wins, even with, the small driving a few blocks and not writing anything down. That felt huge to me. And if I can do that for a few blocks, I can do that for a few miles.
Hmm.
So yeah, so it was, um, it took a lot longer than I thought it would. But I think that was because I didn't have an hour or 2 hours to spend just going out driving every day. So I had to do what I was able to do. But I'm thankful to be able to drive now, and that I really don't think about it, which is pretty incredible. And I feel like is really a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And well done for getting there. So this isn't a question I actually ask probably ever, but what came to me is, you've done a lot of work, you've tried a lot of things, obviously ERP, yoga, mindfulness, read a lot of books, did obviously the peer mentoring, and support groups, and there's more.
Yes, a lot.
Um, yeah, no, it's good. But through this process, what, if anything, what do you think you've learned about yourself?
Oh, I have learned so much. I feel like, I mean, I am myself, but I feel like I'm just like such a deeper version of myself. And I also feel like I really don't care what other people think about me, which is really great because I'm so confident in my own values and who I am, and so confident in like my strength to do things that are really, really hard. So I think, and yeah, I think I've learned to trust myself, and I've learned that I don't need to have 100% certainty about myself or about anything, but I can trust who I believe I am, and that's enough. And so, yeah, I feel like there is so much that I've learned. And just, I think also the importance of, or the power of being being honest and talking
Mm.
about what is going on. Like I said, there was a lot of shame for me. I felt very comfortable telling my OCD therapist my thoughts, but it took me several months to even be able to tell my husband about the hit and run fear, because I just felt like it was so, I just felt like I shouldn't be struggling with that. So he was only supportive, which was amazing. And I think really helpful in my healing too. But yeah, I think just trusting myself, realizing that, and this really translates to other areas of life too. Like I um, can do really hard things. I can be brave, and it doesn't matter if you have fear, that's okay. You can push on through
Mm.
that. And that was a really good, not just OCD lesson, but life lesson, because life is filled with a lot of things that are hard and that are scary. And I have just realized that I'm able to push through those. So that's also a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you did kind of address this, but I'll ask it more explicitly. So, obviously, you did share how the OCD impacted your faith in that, I'm a Christian, I shouldn't be having these thoughts. That was the worry and the feeling you were having. So it's
Mhm.
just to check in where you're at now with your faith in relation to OCD.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel that thankfully, and I also don't take this for granted, I feel that my faith is the strongest it has ever been, in my faith in God, and probably a little bit different. There are some things that, like I said, like I just really want to be very open with my own experience, because I don't want any other Christians or moms to feel like I am, not a good person, or I'm not a Christian, or I'm not, because I'm having these thoughts, or I'm not a great mom, because I just really feel that there's no reason to be guilty or feel shame, because that is OCD, and these are intrusive thoughts. These are not what we want. And that I have this strong faith and belief that God knows the difference. And I really felt that I really felt that God was very close to me during my difficult time, which I also feel is such a gift. And I even saying that, I know that a lot of people with OCD do not, really struggle with that. And so that was something that I learned a lot more about from the International OCD Foundation, the Faith and OCD Conference. That was really eye-opening. And to even learn that Martin Luther, the kind of father of Protestantism, my faith, struggled with what we now believe is OCD. I did not know that. And yeah, it's been comforting to kind of find out that other people that had OCD and were still able to live like very significant lives. I mean, that was a different time. Like, there was no treatment. I don't know what, I'm sure there was much suffering. So I'm thankful to be having OCD in this time where we know treatment and we know medications. And there's, I think, a good understanding. I don't know. I would say in my circles, there's probably a good understanding of a difference between mental illness and like spiritual issues, but I know that can get very confused in a lot of even like in a lot of Christian circles too. So
yeah, thank you for sharing. And yeah, I mean, you did answer this, but I'll ask it more explicitly, which is words of hope for anyone listening.
Yeah, I would just say, like I said, I know that it is so hard. It really feels like it will not get better, but just trust the process. And I would say really advocate for yourself too. Where I am, and I'm in a pretty I'm in a suburb of Chicago, pretty big city area. It's not rural. I felt like a lot of providers did not understand OCD, or didn't even really have it on their radar. So I think you need to advocate for yourself, and find providers who do understand OCD, and then just trust the process, because it is so hopeful. I think it was something that I was listening to with one of Jenna Overbaugh's workshops, that she said something to the effect of, I don't want to get it wrong, but something to the effect of ERP is one of the most effective treatments for any disorder, like any. So I think I'm saying that, I hope I'm saying that correctly. So it is so effective. So I think one of the big problems is being able to access that. I know NoCD is wonderful. I learned a lot about that. I didn't actually trying OCD, but I know that it makes everything really accessible and affordable. Thankfully, my therapist was willing to do virtual visits because I really didn't feel like I could even have the time to like actually drive there and get a babysitter or something like that. So I would just say there's so much hope for OCD. There is such great treatment, and I just believe that if you are able to come through to the other side, there's there is just a lot. There are gifts from the journey. Not saying that the journey is not terribly hard, and I don't wish OCD on anyone, but there are gifts that can come through all of the hard work.
Yeah, really good words. And I think you're right. What Jenna was alluding to out of it, it's been shown to be very effective for OCD and anxiety disorders, ERP, whereas a lot of other disorders may not have shown as good efficacy in other trials for whatever therapies would work for them. Not to say those therapies don't work for those other disorders, but ERP has been proven to be pretty effective for a lot of people with OCD. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let me think. So, you've got a billboard in the suburb of Chicago where you live. What do you want written on that billboard?
So again, something like one of my favorites, Jenna shared something recently that I put as the screenshot on my phone. And it was the quote. I'm not sure if it is her quote or someone else's quote. I looked up, there were a few similar quotes, but it is, courage is not the absence of fear, it's action in the face of fear. So I feel that is inspiring and empowering for people who have OCD and for everyone. Like I said, like there are just so many areas in our lives that we need to have courage. And with ERP, definitely, I mean, there was so much fear, but you just keep going in the fear. So I really loved that quote.
Nice. Yeah. And you pick up the phone and call the 20-year-old you. What do you tell her?
I think I would say that what you think is your greatest weakness, which is anxiety and fear, will become one of your greatest passions and areas of helping others, and you'll be able to help others from your own journey.
Yeah, nice. I like that. And then lastly, is there anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
I don't think so. I think that was it. So thank you so much for allowing me to share my story. I really, really appreciate it.
No, well, thank you for sharing your story. I'm sure it will inspire many, and the resources I'm sure will help too. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us with a one-time tip/donation, please go to theocdstories.com/support. All tips, no matter how large or small, are greatly appreciated. Please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/theOCD stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.